The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agreed to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones video. Alright, my friends, I am back with another episode from my very own version of Game of Thrones Season 9. I still don't know how many episodes I will make, but I do know my story is nearing its end, as all of the remaining characters make their way back down to King's Landing for one final major showdown. I would like to get started right away, so let's go ahead and jump right into this next episode. Shall we begin? Like I said, this is my version of Game of Thrones Season 9, Episode 7, which I have named A Dragon Reborn. In the very first scene of this episode, we will go down south on the Sacred Isle of Faces. There is a full moon in the night sky, sitting directly above the massive weirwood at the center of the God's Eye. Its reflection can be seen on the lake, giving us just enough light to see what's standing on the shore. No different than any other night, the green men are standing their silent watch over the ancient weirwoods, while they stand their silent watch over the sacred island. The black, green, and red dragonglass in their spears is glowing under the moonlit sky. Everything and everyone on the island is silent, except for the thousands of red leaves dancing in the wind. The faces on the weirwoods are as frightening as ever. Their blood-filled eyes are staring back at us as a red-like substance drips down from them onto the ground. We then begin to make our way into the middle of the God's Eye. All of the White Walkers who were once here riding on the backs of their giant elks are now gone. There is still a very large fire burning at the center of the island, where Westeros' largest weirwood sits, surrounded by 7 more weirwoods that are all facing inward at the orange and red flames. The face on this massive weirwood looks horrific. Its mouth is so large, a grown man could easily walk right through it without ducking. As we stare into its blood-red eyes that are full of secrets and ancient wisdom, hundreds of ravens suddenly explode from the weirwood's gaping mouth. Their black wings fill the sky, and their loud shrieking brings an end to this silent night. This is when the children of the forest begin to emerge from the woods. Their great big golden cat's eyes are now glowing in the shadows. The sound of branches breaking and leaves crunching can be heard as they make their way to the center of the isle. There are 7 of them, each holding dragonglass weapons of their own. One by one, they begin jumping into the mouth of the massive weirwood sitting in the middle of the grove. As we follow them inside, we immediately notice the weirwood's mouth is filled with hundreds of skulls of those who were once sacrificed to the old gods over the centuries. The inside of this giant weirwood drops down into a cave system, like the one we have seen out beyond the wall, only this one has more light, allowing us to see much further into the dark abyss. The 7 children of the forest begin ascending down deep into the earth. The scene ends as we watch them vanish into the unknown. Only they know what lies ahead, but you will find out soon enough. In the following scene, we are back in the capital of Westeros. The sun is slowly starting to rise over King's Landing as the city begins to wake up. There are men and women opening up their small shops and markets for business. There are wagons full of new arrivals entering the city every day. There are small children running through the streets as some older kids are chasing behind them. Once again, the scent of raw sewage and freshly baked bread hangs heavy in the morning air. There's about a dozen black ravens circling in the sky above the Red Keep as Samwell and Davos emerge from within the castle. They begin walking over to the main gate, where there are some men of the City Watch standing guard. Davos begins saying something to Sam, but he doesn't hear what he says because he's busy looking over at the ground where he remembers seeing Sir Bronn's lifeless body. The dried blood that was once on the stone street has been washed away, but Sam will never forget what he saw that day. He suddenly stops walking, then looks over at the City Watch to make sure they are out of earshot before he interrupts Davos by asking him, "Have you heard any new developments regarding what happened to Sir Bronn? Has anyone found out what actually happened?" "I wish I could give you that information," says Sir Davos, "but I'm afraid I do not know. I was about to ask you the same thing." "What about Lord Tyrion?" says Samwell. "Have you spoke to him about it?" "Would that I could," says Sir Davos, "but I haven't spoke to him about it either. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen Lord Tyrion since the day we discovered Bronn had fallen from your Grace's balcony." Sam nervously looks into Davos's eyes, then whispers, "I'm not so sure he fell." Sir Bronn would have no reason to be in King Bran's chambers or on his balcony unless he was sent for. Davos slowly looks up at the Red Keep as he thinks about what Sam just said. "You're right," Davos says reluctantly. "The balcony has a railing that stops anyone from falling over so easily." "He fell because someone shoved him," Sam says dreadfully. They are suddenly interrupted by the sound of riders arriving at the main gate. As Sam begins walking over, he shouts, "Open the gates! These men are with me." When the 3 riders dismount from their horses, the guards from the City Watch open the gates, allowing them inside. One of these riders removes a letter from inside his sleeve before handing it over to Sam. Without saying a word, Sam smiles and nods his head at the men, who immediately begin mounting their horses again. Davos looks confused by this brief interaction. Sam starts walking away as he breaks the wax seal on the letter. Wondering what just happened, Davos stops him, demanding to know who those men were and why they hand-delivered him this letter. Sam grabs him by the arm, then walks him away from the main gate, where the men of the City Watch are still standing guard. Sam looks around, making sure no one else can hear them. In a low voice, he says, "It's from the Citadel." Davos is visibly unsatisfied with that answer, so he says, "Well, what's it about? What's with all of this secrecy?" Sam takes a moment before he says, "When I left the Citadel, let's just say, I borrowed some of their books." "What do you mean, borrowed?" Davos says doubtfully. "Fine," says Sam. "I stole some books from the Citadel, but I had every intention of giving them back once I was done with them. However, something happened to one of the books before I could do that. One of them was about the legends of the Long Night. I noticed something very interesting on the front of that book, so I brought it to King Bran, hoping he could help me figure out what it meant. But for some reason he threw the book into the fire. This is when I first started thinking something might be wrong with Bran. So I wrote a letter to the Citadel, asking them if they could give me any more information on the subject. The only thing is, I never heard back from them. That's when I started thinking Bran might be intercepting all of the ravens coming in and out of King's Landing. Since the ravens were compromised, I sent riders of my own. They hand-delivered my messages, then brought me back the Archmaester's findings. I don't know why, but I believe Bran doesn't want me to know the answers I am looking for. Well, I may finally hold them in my hand." Davos is taken aback by all of this. He shakes his head in disbelief, before wiping the sweat from his forehead. After a long deep breath, Davos says, "What does the letter say?" Sam stands beside him, then holds it up for both of them to read. We're not able to make out everything the letter says, but we do see a few lines that are written down. We can see it says, "In regards to the book about the legends of the Long Night." Then, further down the letter, we're also able to see it says, "The Green Men on the Isle of Faces." Now we focus on Davos and Sam's face as they finish reading the letter. Sam's eyes widen, and his mouth hangs open as he sucks in a deep breath. We follow his eyes as they leave the letter. They slowly look up at the Red Keep above them. This scene ends when Sam notices Bran is now sitting out on his balcony, staring down at them. In the following scene, we are back in Winterfell. We are following Howland Reed as he makes his way across the courtyard. The grounds are now flooded with House Stark soldiers and bannermen of the North. It looks as if they're getting ready for war. Dozens of men are getting fitted for armor. Dozens of other men are handing out dragonglass weapons that were left over from the Long Night battle, while others are mounting their horses. Howland Reed heads for the Godswood, where Jon and Sansa are standing before the weirwood. When he notices they are still in conversation, he stops for a moment so they can finish. He grabs the large item from his back before dropping it down onto the ground. He checks to make sure it's still fully wrapped up in the fur. After securing it again, he slings it back over his shoulder. Another minute goes by, then Howland Reed finally says, "I'm sorry to disturb you, Your Grace, but the men are just about saddled and ready. We must leave soon." Jon looks at Sansa with a bit of sadness in his eyes, before opening up his arms and giving her a big hug. The air is thick with a sullen silence. Lord Howland Reed watches as Jon whispers something in her ear. When they let go of each other, Jon looks at Howland Reed and says, "I'm ready." Jon and Sansa begin walking over to where Lord Howland Reed is standing on the other side of the Godswood. The leaves and snow crunches underneath their feet with each and every step. Jon suddenly stops when he feels something hard under his foot. He lifts his boot, then reaches down and grabs something that was half buried in the ground. As he begins to brush away the snow, he immediately recognizes what it is. Sansa says, "You're not the first one to step on that. I also found it before, but I wasn't sure what it was from." Jon looks over at Howland Reed, who is looking at the object in his hands. Jon says, "This was the Night King's. I saw him wearing this beyond the wall, and then again here in Winterfell. It must have fallen from his uniform after he was stabbed by Arya." This reminds Jon of what else he found not long ago. He grabs something he has had stashed inside of his fur overcoat. Sansa can't believe what Jon is holding in his hands. She says, "Is that Bran's? Where did you find that?" "It was inside a cave out beyond the wall. It was where Bran met the Three-Eyed Raven. The same cave where I met the Children of the Forest and Lord Howland Reed." In one hand, Jon is holding the Night King's metallic symbol that he wore around his neck. In the other hand, he is holding Bran's metallic Stark choker that he wore on his neck. He studies both of them for a few moments before Sansa finally grabs his arm and says, "Jon, I sent ravens down to King's Landing, hoping I could speak with Bran. When they were left unanswered, I sent men down there as well. They still aren't back from the capital." "They won't be coming back," Howland Reed says ominously. Sansa's eyes fill with anger as she says, "What? How do you know that?" "I'm sorry, Your Grace, but I did say your brother Bran is in grave danger. If your men aren't back yet, then they're dead already." Lord Howland then looks back in Jon's eyes and says, "We must leave now." The three of them silently exit the Godswood. Jon and Howland's horses are already waiting for them in the courtyard, as well as all the men who are now leaving with them. Right before they mount their horses, Sansa stops Howland Reed. She says, "Do you think this will be enough men? I've sent out more ravens, but I'm not sure if they will make it to their destinations." Lord Howland looks around at all of the men gathered inside the courtyard, and the men who are mounted just outside of the gate. There's maybe 700 soldiers or fewer. "I won't lie to you, Your Grace. I honestly don't know if this will be enough, but it's certainly better than what we had before we stopped here. This amount of men does help, but it will also slow us down. The underground system isn't big enough for this many men. We will have to find a way to make do with the circumstances we are in, Your Grace." "Thank you," says Sansa. Lord Howland bows his head before knocking his heels against his horse. As Jon and Sansa watch the men begin to leave the courtyard, she says one last thing to Jon before he goes south. This scene ends right after Sansa says, "Jon, I want you to get our brother out of King's Landing. Bring him home." As Jon and his horse are leaving through Winterfell's main gate, he looks back over his shoulder then says, "I will." In the next scene, we go back out at sea, where there are roughly 100 ships sailing under the bright sunlight. The sun's reflection is bouncing off the deep blue sea, but it's suddenly swallowed up by a massive shadow flying above. Drogon soars across the sky as he overlooks all of the ships down below. He's drinking up the morning sun as he stretches his wings and glides through the hazy air. The sails of the Fiery Heart and the three-headed dragon are flapping hard in the wind. The scene begins as we see Kinvara standing on the deck of the ship in her long scarlet silk robe. We can see the sun in her eyes as she glares into the sky at Drogon. She stares at the dragon for several moments, but she finally looks away when she hears Daenerys walking her way. Kinvara notices Dany has a look of discomfort written all over her face. As she approaches her, Kinvara says, "Is everything alright, Your Grace?" "No," says Daenerys. "I am still worried about Grey Worm. I haven't seen him since last night. He is still locked inside one of the cabins with the man you brought with us, Makaro." Kinvara smiles, then reaches out and grabs Daenerys by her hand. "You will see him soon enough, Your Grace," says Kinvara. Grey Worm's flesh was kissed by fire. He is not as resistant to the flames like you have been before. He let his emotions get the best of him. He was foolish for grabbing the burning brazier before slamming it down onto the deck of the ship. There are no maesters on board with us, but lucky for him, we have Makaro. If anyone here will be able to fix Grey Worm, it will be him. As she lets go of her hand, Daenerys says, "Some of your soldiers said they heard wild laughter coming from inside Makaro's cabin. Laughter that was deep and dark and mad. Later, they said they heard him singing some song in High Valyrian." Kinvara smiles again. She says, "See for yourself, Daenerys Stormborn. Here they come now." When Daenerys looks over her shoulder, she can see Grey Worm and Makaro are walking their way. Dany notices Grey Worm is naked from the waist up. His right hand is wrapped in bandages, but his left hand looks very disturbing. The other men standing around the ship begin whispering and trading glances as they get a look at Grey Worm's arm. "Is everything okay?" says Daenerys, after Grey Worm and Makaro stop in front of her. "Let me have a look at your hand," says Kinvara. Grey Worm raised a charred and blackened hand. It was bloody all the way up to his elbow. Even black smoke rose from his fingers. A horrified Daenerys says, "I will find you a maester as soon as we reach Westeros." "That is not necessary," says Makkaro. "I have fixed his hand, your grace." Dany then looks back at Grey Worm, waiting for him to say something. "I am fine, your grace," says Grey Worm. "My hand feels even stronger than it did before. It feels like there is a fire running through the veins in my hand." Makkaro smiles, then walks away, back below the deck. Grey Worm then looks at Kinvara and says, "May I speak with your grace alone?" "Of course," says Kinvara, who smiles, bows her head, then leaves as well. When they're finally alone, Daenerys asks him again, "Are you sure everything is okay?" "Yes, your grace. I swear my hand feels fine, but there is something else I think we should discuss." "Okay," says Daenerys, with a bit of hesitation in her voice. "What would you like to discuss?" "It's Jon Snow," says Grey Worm. "I am worried about what might happen once we land in Westeros again. Kinvara says we will need him, but I don't know how much I believe her. He has already shown us that he cannot be trusted, your grace. You have said that we need to stop Brandon Stark, but that's Jon Snow's brother. What happens if Jon has to choose between saving you or saving his own brother? What happens if Bran attempts to harm you? Would Jon kill his own brother to save you? Because I don't think he will. I think the opposite is more likely to happen, your grace." Dany looks out at the deep blue sea that surrounds them. She watches as Drogon flies down low before he skims right above the water. After another moment of silence, Daenerys finally says, "I do understand your concerns. I have some of my own. Some days, I walk out onto this deck, look out at the sea, and wonder if I should go back to Westeros at all. Sometimes I wonder if I should risk my own life to save those who may never love me. On other days, I walk out onto this deck, look out at the sea, and think about killing Jon Snow as soon as we land in Westeros. Those dark thoughts eventually fade away when I remember why I wanted to take back the Iron Throne that I thought was rightfully mine. I don't want to be remembered the same way as everyone remembers my father." Some of the anger starts to leave Grey Worm's eyes. "I want to save those who can't save themselves," says Daenerys. "That's one of the reasons why so many were willing to follow me. If I can't fight for that, then it was all for nothing. Westeros, and even the entire realm, is right back where we started. I have decided that if I am going to live, I can't live with that." Daenerys begins slowly walking away, but then she stops and looks back at Grey Worm. She says, "But then again, words are just wind. If I am being honest, I don't know how I will react when I see Jon Snow again." Grey Worm lifts his head back up. He looks over at Dany, and there is a fire in his eyes again. As Daenerys goes to walk away, Grey Worm stops her. He says, "Your grace, I saw Jon Snow on the back of Drogon when Kinvara had me look in her flames. If Jon rides Drogon, what does that mean happen to you?" There is a bit of sadness in Dany's eyes when she softly says, "I don't know." The scene ends right after Grey Worm says, "I won't let you out of my sight again, your grace. When we arrive in Westeros, I will kill Jon Snow myself." In the next scene, we are back in King's Landing. We follow Samwell and Sir Davos as they are walking inside of the Red Keep. The sound of their footsteps scare off some of the ravens that are in the Great Hall, where the Iron Throne once sat. As they are making their way across the throne room, Davos and Sam hold their hands over their nose when they start smelling a horrible stench. The ravens have nearly finished eating the unknown dead man who has been laying in the Great Hall all week. When Sam and Davos look over at what's left of him, all we see is basically a skeleton dressed in bloody rags. There is a raven standing on the rotting man's skull, watching Davos and Sam with hatred in its black eyes. The raven watches them until they're out of sight. When Sam and Davos finally arrive in the small council's chambers, they sit in their seats and wait. There is an ominous silence in the small council room. Davos looks around at all of the empty seats beside them. We watch them sit here in silence for what feels like several minutes. At last, Davos throws a glance Sam's way and says, "How early are we?" "They should be here already," says Sam. "We have our meetings at this hour every week." "Maybe Lord Tyrion is running late," says Sir Davos. "It certainly wouldn't be the first time." Sam smiles nervously before he says, "No, it would not." But that doesn't answer for Sir Podrick and Brienne. "Does Brienne strike you as someone who runs late?" "No, she doesn't," says Sir Davos. Now Sam begins looking around the room at all of the empty seats. Bronn is dead, but Lord Tyrion, Sir Podrick, and Brienne, and even King Bran are not at their scheduled meeting. That's when they begin hearing the sound of boots walking their way. They eagerly stand up, hoping to see their other advisors walk in and join them. Instead, a man dressed in the golden Kingsguard armor stands before them. "Hello," says Sam, as he smiles. The Kingsguard man doesn't smile, nor does he greet Sam back. This is one of the same men who arrested Lord Tyrion, as well as Brienne and Sir Podrick. "Follow me," says the member of the Kingsguard. "But we have a meeting," says Sam. "We are waiting for the others." "There will be no meeting today," says the Kingsguardman. "I'm only here because your grace said I would find both of you here. He gave me orders to locate both of you, then bring you with me to join him. Follow me. He's right this way." As the member of the Kingsguard begins walking away, Sam and Davos look at each other with confusion. They don't fully understand what's happening. "Wait a minute," says Davos. "You will have to forgive me, sir, but we have never seen you before. Who are you, and where did you get that armor?" The Kingsguardman smiles as he slowly starts walking Davos's way, until he's standing right in front of him. He stares long and hard into his eyes, but then he abruptly jams the handle of his sword into Davos's stomach, forcing him to fall down to one knee. As Davos tries finding his breath, the Kingsguard member says, "Your grace is the only man I answer to. Now, as I said before, follow me. Your king commands it." Sam rushes over, helping Davos get back on his feet. After he finally catches his breath, Davos and Sam reluctantly follow the Kingsguard man out of the room, then down the stairs. They both feel an overwhelming sense of dread. Sam's feet feel heavier after each and every step. As they make their ascension down the stairs, they begin hearing what sounds like a large crowd gathered outside. It grows louder and louder as they get closer to the doors. Sam and Davos look at each other with uncertainty. When they reach the main entrance of the Red Keep, the Kingsguardman swings open the doors. They are momentarily blinded by the sunlight, and the sound of 1,000 voices shouting makes them feel a little disoriented. Sam rubs his eyes as he looks around at the crowd gathering outside. Davos holds his stomach as he follows them around the side of the Red Keep. Samwell and Sir Davos are shocked by what they see up ahead. They see Bran sitting on a very large platform about 100 feet away. A few men are seen behind him, setting up the gallows for an execution. Right in front of Bran is Lord Tyrion, Brienne, and Podrick. All of them are down on their knees, with their hands behind their backs. Each of them have a gag in their mouth as well. Standing right next to Bran are the other new members of the Kingsguard. Sam and Davos rush through the crowd as they make their way up to the stage. Davos yells out, "Your Grace, what is the meaning of this? Why are they bound and gagged?" However, Bran doesn't answer him. Instead, Sam and Davos are immediately arrested by the new sworn brothers of the Kingsguard. One of Bran's guards leans in close to Davos and Sam. He says, "Don't say another word. Let this serve as a lesson. Now enjoy the show." Sam and Davos are stunned by this shocking turn of events. Suddenly, Bran lifts his arms in the air, silencing the large crowd gathered in front of them. When the screaming and shouting begins to soften, Bran says, "It's very unfortunate that we have to meet under these circumstances, but it seems there are some rebels among us. Lord Tyrion Lannister, your very own Hand of the King, is guilty of murdering his friend, our Master of Coin, Sir Bronn of Highgarden. Lady Brienne and Sir Podrick have always been on the side of the Lannisters." This is when one of Bran's Kingsguard shouts, "Lady Brienne even laid with a Lannister. She slept with Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. She has also written lies about him in our White Book, making him out to be some sort of hero." The crowd erupts when they hear this. We hear some of them shouting, "The Lannisters have always been murderers. Kill them all." Some of them begin spitting at Brienne, while others are throwing rocks at Lord Tyrion. After a few moments of this, Bran lifts his arms again, silencing everyone there. He says, "I gave Brienne a chance to show her loyalty. All she had to do was kill Lord Tyrion. Show us that once and for all, you no longer favor the Lannisters." But she would not do this. It seems that Lady Brienne would rather die than to honor her king. "Well, Lady Brienne, I will give you one more chance." Bran gives a signal to one of the Kingsguard, who then walks over and removes the gag from Brienne's mouth. "I will ask you again, in front of everyone," says Bran. "Who do you fight for, Lady Brienne? Will you defend your king by slaying this murderous Lion of Lannister, or will you die beside him? You must decide, here and now, the sword or the noose." As the tears are falling from Brienne's face, she helplessly looks over at Sir Podrick. who has sadness in his eyes as well. He shakes his head no. He doesn't want Brienne to break her honor by giving him what he wants. She now looks over at Lord Tyrion, who is covered in his own sweat and urine. Brienne looks into Bran's eyes. It seems like all of his life has left them as he stares back at her emotionless. Finally, she says, "I will not make that choice." The crowd explodes into shouting again. "Then so be it," says Bran. "Your fate has been sealed." He looks at his new sworn brothers of the Kingsguard, then says, "Hang them first." Brienne and Sir Podrick are yanked up onto their feet. Sam and Davos are even more horrified than before. They know there is nothing they can do to stop this. The nooses were slipped around their necks, then jerked tight. One of the brothers of the Kingsguard looks at Brienne, then says, "If you have any other crimes you want to confess to your gods, now would be the time to say them." When she doesn't answer him, he smiles, then says, "You're the strong silent type, I see. Have it your way, Lady Brienne. Now let's see if you can dance." He yanked on her rope hard, before the floor fell out from under Brienne and Sir Podrick's feet. Brienne immediately felt the hemp constricting around her neck, digging into her skin, forcing her chin upward. It sounds like Lord Tyrion is cursing at them through his gag, but not the boy. Sir Podrick never lifted his eyes, not even when his feet jerked up off the ground. Brienne thought, if this is some bad dream, it is time for me to awaken. If this is real, it is time for me to die. All she could see was Sir Podrick, the noose around his thin neck, and his legs as they started to spasm. He was kicking, choking, and dying. Her mouth opened. She sucked the air in desperately, even as the rope was strangling her. Nothing had ever hurt so much. This scene ends right after Brienne screams a word. In the final scene of this episode, we go back below the ground, somewhere under Westeros. We are following 7 small shadows as they move through the darkness that lies ahead. One of them is holding a light, but we're still not able to see enough to make out who they are. We keep following the 7 shadows as they move further and further into the black abyss. It's not long before they spill out into a large open cave. When this happens, their light reflects off the cave walls, revealing who they are. It's the 7 children of the forest who jumped into the mouth of the massive weirwood on the Isle of Faces. They are now standing inside of a cave that has familiar drawings all over its walls. As we see more and more drawings on the walls, we realize it's the same cave Jon and Daenerys were in on Dragonstone. These 7 small creatures walk through the cave until they emerge out onto the beach. There is a full blood moon in the sky. The empty large castle looms over them as they form a circle near the edge of the water. All 7 of them are now facing inward at each other. That's when each of them simultaneously grab their dragonglass daggers before they make a small incision on their hand. As the blood drips down from their hands, it falls onto the sand, and a small wave of water comes up to their feet. The salt water washes away their blood before sucking it back out to the sea. Now they shut their eyes, as they start saying something in a language unknown by man. It sounds more like they're singing a song of the earth. This is when something very strange starts to happen. Dark clouds begin forming right above them. Lightning starts to strike. Thunder begins to crack. The sound of the wind gets very loud, as it throws sand all over the beach. Suddenly, a lightning bolt strikes down onto Dragonstone, leaving a very large crack across the face of the stone castle. The 7 children of the forest begin chanting louder and louder, as the dark clouds above them get even more violent. The waves in the sea are getting larger, but they're not smashing into the shore. It's almost as if the ocean water is lifting directly up into the sky. The children finally open their eyes. All we see is white. Again, their chanting grows even louder, as the thunder snaps and cracks like a whip. As the seawater begins moving faster in a circular direction, another bolt of lightning strikes down right into the center of the swirling water. As soon as the dark clouds begin to open up, the children's chanting stops, but in that exact moment, it looks as if an explosion goes off in the water. Millions of gallons of seawater flies up into the sky as a black shadow emerges above. We suddenly hear the ear-splitting scream of a dragon. With their dark magic, the children have summoned Rhaegal from below the sea. It's the most frightening thing we have ever seen. The dragon's eyes are now red. Because it was decomposing in the salt water for so long, Some of its scales are slipping right off of its bones. The large holes in his neck and chest allow us to see its fire burning inside of him at all times. The episode ends as the dragon disappears into the night sky.